It's 8:11. This is Coffee Talk. And with me, his historian, Stephen Arms. And thanks you for being back with us again. Kind of, because this is the second time you've been on with us, kind of fill in everybody about your background and things if this is the first time they've heard you on the air.
Well, thanks for having me, Doug.
You bet.
I'm used to teach history in California at Fresno City College primarily, but also taught for a year at California State University, Fresno. And I've been living in Aberdeen now for 14 years. We came up right after right at the height of the housing market in California and got out where the getting was good.
Like a lot of people that live in the Highlands did that.
Yeah. It gave us the ability at least to out and out just buy our house in Aberdeen and pay off the one there. That was handy. And
so you've been here long enough that you may not be a native, but you're native enough.
Well, I'm getting native enough. Yeah. Apparently, you have to be here at least 3 or 4 generations to be a native in this area. Yeah. I understand, but
now, so are you also a professor?
I'm not currently teaching, but I used to be. I have my bachelor's and master's in history.
Okay. What type of history classes are we talking about? Was it everything?
I taught mostly United States history, which is what my degree is actually in. But I also taught ancient world, as in Western civilization. And so basically the history of the world from the Western point of view from about 3000 BC to modern times.
Now, when you say Western point of view, have you ever looked at it, found out what the Eastern point of view is?
Oh, yeah. I did teach the class one time in world history. Where you have to, and I'm familiar with what happened in the Yangtze valleys and the Indus valleys and the history of the world and all the things that changed from there. Try to have if you're a historian, you have to have a general knowledge in almost everything. I mean, if you limit yourself too much, you're going to miss the overall patterns of what actually happens in the world, and that's what's most important is how things move on. History is what we live in, and we move through it, but it's also where we've been, and you know where you are because you know where you've been.
And plus, if you look back in history, it's just like when you listen to the Centennial Minute that the Polson Museum sponsors, and they talk about what happened 100 years ago. And it's interesting because some things have changed a lot, other things don't change at all because some of the issues that people have are still the same. It's just in a different time.
Well, it's true. That's very much the case. I'm surprised when you read the ancient world, you can go back and read Roman philosophers or historians of the day, and they're the same problems humans are having now. I mean, human beings really haven't changed that much in the time. Our technology's changed, and it's created problems that are unique for the time. Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, the founding fathers wouldn't have had the issue of cloning as a question, or having to deal with nuclear weapons,
or Facebook.
Oh gosh, my God, Facebook! That's been a little fascinating thing in the news. That whole dog and pony show would be what I would probably refer to it as. Congress. Anyway.
Now, what do you think about what's going on in Syria? Because it's getting pretty serious right now.
It is. Syria is. I had never any doubts in my mind that Assad was a butcher, but I'm a little bit surprised that he's so stupid. Because I mean, this whole as soon as you get a mention of that we're thinking about maybe having troops being put down in the future, he does a chemical attack. I mean, I'm not a conspiracy theory guy. I like to have my facts, but that just struck me as very weird. I think before we start blowing up bases and confronting a situation with the Russians directly, because the Russians do have the ability to fight back, I think that I hope that the administration and the government takes the time to find out exactly what happened.
Well, I think when I was watching the news this morning, I think that's kind of what's going on right now is they're trying to put together a plan, just off the cuff. For me, I would just, one of the targets I'd hit would be the palace of Assad, knowing he probably isn't there, but just flatten it. So when he gets back, he'll find out what it's like to have your home destroyed.
And I agree. Getting rid of Assad it would be a good thing, but the problem also is once he's gone, what are you going to fill in the meantime? I mean, if you'd driven Assad out 5 years ago, who would be in charge of Syria now? Would it be the rebel forces we're back in, or would it be ISIS?
Yeah. Well, this is what happened when they got rid of trying to think.
Saddam Hussein?
No. He has a turban on his head. Gaddafi.
Yeah. Good old Muammar Gaddafi.
Yeah, that turned into a big mess.
Again, and we ended up with people killed in an embassy there because of what had happened. So, I mean, obviously whenever you're playing around with creating governments, you have to be very careful. And this situation, I mean, I don't think you should be terrified of the Russians, but I think you should be aware of the fact the Russian bear is called a bear for a reason. It does have claws.
Now, what do you think, though, about, because the Russians had their own version of Blackwater, and they're a bunch of contractors. They call them contractors, and this whole story hasn't come out, I don't think, totally, but they made an attack on one of the rebel areas that. And the Russians did, but they used these contractors along with Saddam, or not Saddam forces, but Assad forces, and they were attacking this position. We had American advisors there, so they called in heavy air cover and just flattened everybody that in the attack. I mean, and they say that somewhere between 150 and perhaps as many as 500 Russians were killed, and Putin's denying this ever happened. People were wondering, well, where's my brother? Where's my son? Where's my husband? And I found that to be, that kind of blew me away, because would we do the same thing if 500 Blackwater, consultants or contractors were killed by Russian forces?
Well, I think,
would we try and cover that up? I don't think so.
I don't think we try to cover it up, but I think the deniability factor is they call them mercenaries. Is that they're not actually Russian soldiers. They're people who are there contractually.
Right.
Is what is the idea. I don't know if we would... I think the problem with dealing with the Russians in this is that Putin does not want to have a shooting war with the United States either. So that's what I'm saying. I don't think you need to be terrified of Russia, but I do think you need to be... do not provoke him too much. People say, well, Russia has a weak economy. I know, but a solution to a weak economy is war.
Well, yeah, and they've always been butt kickers. The Russians are tough.
No, they are, but you can't deny that their history's been long and bloodied and mostly inflicted against each other. They remind me a little of the Irish in that way, since I'm Irish, and the Irish like a fight, and the Russians like a fight too. So, I am, like I said, I just want to make sure that people are careful. Does the president have the right to deploy forces? Of course he does. Though, again, that's the argument about does he have the right based on is it declaring war? Well, obviously we were able to we haven't declared war since World War II, so obviously presidents can use force when it's deemed necessary. I'm not sure that I'm happy about it sometimes, but I think it always depends on whether you like the president or not.
Well, it's obvious that there's a battle going on between Congress, the Supreme Court, and the president, because they're always jockeying for power.
Well, there's supposed to be a balance between them. That in some ways is a good thing. But I often wonder if they're supposed to be competitive but not antagonistic. And I'm beginning to wonder now, is it more just a pure antagonism? Are they...
It's KBKW's Coffee Talk. 8:21 is the time. Stephen Arms is our guest today. And if you have any comments or questions, just give us a call. 360-533-5259. What are some of the misconceptions people have, perhaps maybe about what they think's in the Constitution, or something that is totally off base, but people have believed it over the years?
Well, there's misconceptions on the Constitution, and generally just misconceptions in history too. I think a good example of a misconception in history would be Benjamin Franklin discovered electricity. I mean, we hear about Ben Franklin flying his kite in a thunderstorm as kids and got hit by lightning and all that. And
was he a kid when he did this?
Oh, no, when we were kids.
Okay. I was going to say, I thought he was an adult. Yeah.
No, he was an adult. I was just thinking that it's back in 1752. Franklin was basically, they knew about electricity at that point. They'd known electricity for a long time, and Ben Franklin was trying to prove that lightning was electricity. And he did fly a silk kite in a rainstorm, and he had a key tied to the line, and he noticed when he was doing it that the threads on the string were standing out on his side, and when he touched the key, there was a little bit of a spark. So he determined there was electricity in the air during a thunderstorm, So lightning is electricity.
Oh, I thought he got hit by a bolt of lightning, so it's not really that way at all.
And actually, that happened a few months later, not with Franklin, though, with somebody else. There was a Russian scientist in St. Petersburg who conducted the same experiment, and his kite got hit by lightning, and it killed him.
Whoa. See, the Russians and America have been competing all these years.
They were obviously trying to steal our technology and get involved in our elections, I'd assume, even back then, right?
Well, evidently. I wonder if he was, I find out his last name was Putin. Well, let's go to our listener line. Hi, you're on the air.
Well, it's a good thing Ben discovered electricity, because then if he hadn't, Al Gore couldn't have invented the internet, right? So something that you're really interesting and fascinating already, and in your history degrees is I've chased history for as long as I can remember. It's one of my favorite subjects of study. So you and Gary are always interesting characters, and you're now added to that history characters. But sorry to take so long, Doug. Imaginary lines. Some of the things I call imaginary lines, and I think that you've had experience with, is borders. Country borders designed by a country, designed by an idea, designed by a clan, designed by whomever. And you talked about it a little bit with inserting governments, right? Saddam Hussein was a dictator over many different factions.
Now, do you have a question you're going to ask? Okay.
Yes, I do, Doug. Patience.
You do it. You need to do it faster.
Okay. So he had all these factions that he was holding together tyrannically, right? Would it have been more beneficial for them to have separated peacefully, like Czechoslovakia or Czechs in the Slovak Republic, than for us to have gone in and inserted a new government in that imaginary line? You know what I'm saying? So you had the Kurds, you had the Shiites, the Sunnis, and all those fighting under Saddam, and he was just a big old jerk, right?
I think I see where your point here. I think what you're saying is artificial boundaries. You can sometimes have areas where you have groups and clans or factions that want to believe that territory is their own. I think it all depends on whether those factions are also going to function peacefully together. If you divide a country into small pieces and everyone starts killing each other, I don't think you've accomplished anything at that point. You are right. Hussein was able to keep it because he ruled with an iron fist. That's one advantage that dictators have. But on the other hand, I think it depends on the part of the world you're talking about and the people that you're talking about. I mean, because again, when you're dealing with the issue of Islam, you have obviously Shiite and you have Sunni. And there's traditionally been combat for them going back to the Abyssinian Empire in the 800s. So I do think you have to be careful when you want to just let your boundaries go wherever they can be historically fall, but it depends on the peoples involved in it.
Right, and that's, I think, where we're finding, or the United States is finding problems, is because we're trying to manage that issue, and we don't have any idea how to manage our own issues, right? And so, anyway, that was. But it's going to be fun listening to you. I hope you continue to come on, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. And yes, you'll be a regular on the show. Yeah, that's what they call nation building.
Oh, it is, and it can be very. I mean, a lot of times what happened again after World War I, borders got redrawn in the world by the winning powers, and that. And sometimes they didn't have any. People generally use geography. They use rivers. They use mountain ranges. That's a good way to divide a country. Well, the only problem with that is you have to deal with the peoples in that area. If you draw a line right down the middle of an area, and you people are on both sides of it, now you're going to have to worry about them. One side they may be abused, and the other side they may be coming to power. You're going to end up with conflict. Africa is a classic example of this because Africa's borders. Africa is. I remember when I was studying African history. Africa always think of it as tribal, even if it's very large tribes. I mean, there are areas of Africa that have huge amounts of tribes. Areas, obviously the Zulu in South Africa be an example of that. But if you start drawing borders in the middle where you have tribes, you're going to get fighting because, again, people think, well, Africa's people in Africa are all they're all the same, race. They're all, black people, so therefore it should be no problem. Well, don't think that's the case because tribes know each tribes and they have some of them have been hating each other for centuries and killing each other for centuries. You have to think that's an issue about nation building is very difficult because you have to have some idea what the heck you're doing. And you're right, if you don't study the histories of the area, you're not going to know the differences between the Kush peoples and the Kusan peoples and all the different factors that are in Africa, for example.
Of course, a lot of these were colonies per se, and so the British and the French and whoever else had a colony, they always kind of ruled with an iron fist. So here it is. This is what it's going to be.
And then when that power base goes away, when nature pours a vacuum, and then all of a sudden the faction. And we're seeing that in South Africa today. Because a lot of the Boers, the white people in South Africa, their farmers are being killed wholesale in South Africa right now, because there isn't really anyone in those areas to defend them, and their lands are getting taken over because of old anger and old animosities.
So who's taking them over? Just the tribes are taking over?
It's been a faction. Yeah, there's a lot of. You should read on South Africa. There's a lot of people dying at this point. That is an unfortunate situation.
A lot of people starving too.
True. Yeah. Well, it's a more wealthy nation than a lot of African nations are, though, unfortunately.
And the thing is there's so many resources
there is.
In the country, yet they can't get organized enough, as a continent to make it work for them.
Well, when you think about it, I mean, that area is tropical. It should have plenty of food and production capability, and yet people still starve.
Yeah, it's pretty insane, isn't it? It's 8:29. We're going to take a break, and then we'll be back and continue our conversation with Stephen Arms, who is a historian and also, of course, kind of a neat guy. And you have your YouTube. It's KBKW's Coffee Talk, and we have with us the man who has his own YouTube channel. And so Stephen Arms is with us. And Stephen, tell us about your YouTube channel and what people will find on it.
Well, my YouTube channel is called Arena of History, and if you go to YouTube and do a search engine on it, you'll find my videos. I do historical videos similar to what I'm doing here. Matter of fact, I did one for April Fools, which is I think is funny. Everyone who's watched it says it's funny. But the one before that, actually, the last time I was on here, I actually put our entire interview on there, and people can go and listen to what we were talking about last month. And I try to deal either with issues of history. I've been doing a series on the Bill of Rights. And I've also, sometimes we'll just cover, I did one on DACA because DACA was a big issue a few months ago, so people didn't know what it was. So I told them what DACA was, where it came from. I did one on the FISA courts. Because that's a big issue about, what is a FISA court and what does it do, and is it violating our rights? And the answer is yes. But anyway, you'll find that if you go and listen to my video. So it's Arena of History, like ARENA, and it's from an old quote that Theodore Roosevelt did at a speech talking about the man in the arena, the one who's actually the one who's doing the fighting. I've always very been impressed with that quoting. I did I did historiographical work for my master's thesis on Theodore Roosevelt, so I'm a big fan of TR. And so anyway, that's my YouTube channel, and I have a dozen and a half videos now because they saved them. And go there, and if you like it, subscribe, and I can use more people because it gets more people to be able to watch it. So Arena of History.
All right, so go check it out, folks, and. See, I went to the Roosevelt High School in Seattle, so that was, Teddy Roosevelt, Rough Riders, and all that sort of thing. And but FDR was the one, like, in our kitchen at home, we had a picture. Of course, I was born in 1950, so I'm like maybe 3 or 4 years old when I noticed this. We had FDR on the wall in the kitchen. He was like a god, even though he passed away. Very reverent people were about him back then. Hi, you're on the air.
Yeah, I'm anxiously awaiting your debate, or whatever you want to call it, with Gary Morrell in the studio. He's got a PhD in propaganda, so you really shouldn't have too much trouble with him. He makes up stuff about Israel and about socialism and about non-existent articles. And one thing I corrected him on a year ago.
Well, now, that non-existent article, he realized that he came back on the air and said
you know what he did, Doug, when he came back on? He gave the correct name, which, by the way, the source was Joe Scarborough, and he wasn't going to admit that was his source because the guy's got no credibility.
That isn't why he just
when he came back on, the numbers he quoted were still wrong because I went to that article too, and the percentages he gave were not correct, and so he just makes stuff up, and he always has.
Okay. You can't say that about him. First off,
I can. Because
no, you can't. You can't because he's not a politician. You can't say that about him.
He's a PA.
I don't care. You can't say anything on the air about somebody like that. That's not running for office or in office.
Okay,
he's a private citizen.
It's a defamation of character is what you're doing. You should be very careful about.
Yeah, you can get in trouble for that. Let's go to our next caller. Hi, you're on the air. Hi, you're on the air.
Oh, sorry. Historically speaking, has it ever been a smart thing to do to drink Roundup?
Okay, we're not going to bring that up either.
Well, especially if you're not if you're a tree or a plant, you probably definitely shouldn't drink it.
So when it comes to how the news is being, because I hardly watch CNN. I watch their documentaries, but now I've switched to watching I'll go to the CBS website, or Google has a website where you can go and they have stories from all different whether it's newspapers, magazines, whatever, anything out there. They have kind of a collection of different news organizations that you can compare the same stories if you want and see what's going on. And so that's what I'm doing, because CNN has basically declared war on Trump.
Oh, I agree.
Trump declared war on them. So then, they spend all their time slamming him. And, well, where's the other news? I want the other news. You have to go to the 6 o'clock news or whatever, where they cover all the stories for the whole day to know what the hell's going on. And if you go to Fox, then you're going to get, he's God and he's the greatest person that ever lived. And so then you're not going to get all the straight poop there either.
I would agree. There are some people on CNN who are reputable, but it does sound like all stormy all the time right now.
Yeah.
And I agree with you on Fox. I don't listen to most of the Fox commentators. There are a couple of people who do news, the actual news pieces there, that I think they're giving reasonable facts and information. But as you'll find those on CNN too, as long as you can avoid, we're going to have a discussion panel now about. So is Trump a murderer? Is he Hitler? Is he the Antichrist? And you please answer yes or no. Trump is a fascinating phenomenon from a historical point of view. Like I said, Andrew Jackson's the last time we had a president that was like this, that was basically a totally outsider who came in and has had a lot of populist support. Like I said, I didn't support his presidency when he was running, but he's president of the United States, so he's my president, and I want him to succeed. But I am very concerned with the level of vitriol and hatred that it goes against it, because it becomes unreasonable. It's unproductive. Again, is not only are the Democrats obviously at war with President Trump, but again, I'm not a big conspiracy guy, but the deep state idea suddenly starts sounding like a real. This raid on his lawyer was a phenomenal situation where you're dealing with the right to self-incrimination is prohibited in the Constitution. It's in the Fifth Amendment, and a lawyer's relationship with their client is in that self-incrimination idea, and yet they roll into this lawyer's office and seize everything they can get their hands on. Under what probable cause? It's an election violation that may be a fine down the road, and yet you're violating the Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendment in the process by doing it. As an American citizen, I don't like the idea when the FBI starts acting like the KGB.
Well, because the deep state thing, I think there are people that feel they're patriots that think that the only way the nation can survive is if they get rid of Trump. I think there's people that actually believe that, and so there could be an underground movement to get rid of him, or you've got some media that want him out of there because he's causing issues for him.
I'd agree with that, but I don't. But I get worried when you're bending the rules. When you start saying, "I'm going to." We need to get rid of this man at whatever cost that happens to be. Well, then you're undermining the whole election system. We do have a method for that. In 3 years now, we're going to have a presidential election. If you think that Donald Trump should not be president, then don't vote for him. But if you think that he is, then you should. But I mean, that's the way you deal with the president. As far as I know, I mean, the Russian collusion idea has been obviously it isn't panning out because they're going on to Stormy Daniels and everything else. And at what point does my problem with this whole investigation with Mueller is I didn't know that the United States appointed high inquisitors to go off and find what is wrong with the country, and that's the problem I have with special prosecutors. There's nothing in the Constitution about them, and they should not exist. If your Justice Department can't settle the problem, then you need to get new people in your Justice Department. I mean, I just like handing power over to an individual to a level where, I mean, it started out on Russian collusion, and I thought that was hilarious that all of a sudden it reminded me of, my line for that is, welcome to the party, pal. Gee, the Russians have been messing with our elections? Well, only since Joe Stalin's time.
I'm sure we mess with, well, of course, how do you mess with an election in Russia?
Well, yeah, it's hard to mess with an election in Russia when the Russian elections are, Putin wins pretty much hands down and all that. I mean, I think it's funny, wasn't it? 2006, in the election with Mitt Romney and Barack Obama, Obama looked at Romney and said the 1980s wants its foreign policy back because he was saying the Russians are an issue. And lo and behold, we're in 2018, and the Russians are suddenly an issue again. Well, I get an issue. They've always been an issue. Just because you've ignored them doesn't mean that they aren't a problem. And I don't know. I mean, I'm curious to see. That's why it gets us back to the situation in Syria. Are the Russians want Syria because Vladimir Putin is, from my estimation, wants to build back a Russian empire.
Yeah.
And he needs to have that control of the Middle East because he can control all the oil he needs to run any sort of machine he needs to run.
But I can see their point because, I mean, when I was in the Army, Russia was probably at its pinnacle. Mm-hmm. And they had a huge amount of territory that was theirs, and I could see in my mind what would happen if we lost territory in this country. Mm-hmm. Say, for instance, we lost California to Mexico, which would make Boss Bill happy. But anyway, so if we lost some states to Mexico, okay, and then a new president comes and says, we are going to take back Texas and California. It's our, I would say, well, okay, what the heck? Just because it's one of the issues on dealing with the Russians is you don't have to agree with them to oppose, you don't have to agree with them to respect that they are a nation and they have reasons for why they do that. You still have to oppose them because they're a threat. They're a threat to our interests and they're a threat to the world. If you believe the idea that people should have the right to make choices in their lives, that you should have some form of republic, some form of democratic government, and that is a good thing, then you need to be worried about dictators. Well, but there are a lot of them in the world. But like I said, poking China's a dictatorship, Russia's a dictatorship. Both of them we're having problems with, and we should, because they, if left unchecked, they will continue to expand until they're stopped. One of the neatest experiences I ever had, though, is I got detained in East Berlin because I was doing a show for AFN on the Berlin Wall and Berlin Orientation Tour, and I had a Nagra tape recorder, which they used for soundtracks for movies back then, because they didn't have cassettes that had Dolby. And I wanted to get really good, good audio. And so then I got the Nagra and I had to sign for it because if it got destroyed, I'd have to pay for it. So I'm running 5-inch reels so I can keep the lid closed. So I do my interviews on the west side of the wall with some of our soldiers and some other people. I go to the east side, and there's a monument, not a monument. It's like a cemetery where a lot of Russians that took Berlin are buried. Mm-hmm. And there's several 100,000, I believe, that are there, 100,000, whatever. And they got these two statues that when you enter. And so I was talking to some American soldiers that were viewing this, and then there was some young pioneers with their instructor. So I came up to her, and just asked her if she spoke English, and she did. She spoke English with a British accent because she was educated in England. And so I interviewed her about the young pioneers, which is kind of like the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and everything. Got done with I guess I was just wrapping it up. All of a sudden, this hand comes down on my shoulder. I look up. This huge Russian soldier is telling me to stop. So I stop, and he confiscates the tape. So everything on that side of the wall, I lose because he takes the tape away. Then he wants my tape recorder because he wants to make sure there's no tape recorder or a recording device inside of it. And so I'm not going to give it to him.
No. Yeah.
And so I can't remember if it was a captain or a lieutenant. I think it was a captain. Anyway, American captain comes over and he said, "Can I help you? Or are you having an issue here?" So he was kind of my liaison. And so they finally x-rayed the machine with a fluoroscope so they could see that there was nothing in there, and then we got out of there. But we got to hang out with these Russian soldiers and swap cigarettes and stuff. It was really cool. It was like two Super Bowl teams, that are Super Bowl bound, and they're hanging out like in a friendly manner, but they're at war with each other.
Well, again, Russians still put their pants on.
Oh yeah,
one leg at a time.
It was cool.
You've offered them vodka, you'd had a friend for life, probably.
Yeah.
But I mean, a lot of people figured about that sometimes the ruling factions are not necessarily people, or tend to be people. Most people just want to have their children survive. They want to have a roof over their head. They want to live their normal lives. The politics sometimes obviously gets in the way of that. And a classic example of that would be Union and Confederate soldiers. They're Americans. They both fought against each other and killed 700,000 dead, more than all of other wars combined. And yet, if you got them together, they were just Union and Confederate boys, and they would just sit there, and it wasn't an issue. It was the politic. Again, most Confederate soldiers, slavery's an issue in the Civil War, but most Confederate soldiers, only 5% of people actually owned slaves. So, I mean, it wasn't as big an issue. It was more, they looked at it more upon their two countries fighting for their points of view, but most of them didn't even know that. They just knew that the Yankees were the enemy and they were supposed to fight them. But if it was, but they could all sit down and have a barbecue together, it wouldn't have been an issue.
Well, you felt like because you're soldiers. I mean, exactly. Soldier's a soldier. We're soldiers, except for, we're at a Cold War at that time. But it's KBKW's Coffee Talk. It is 8:54. And Stephen Arms is with us. He's a historian and also has his own YouTube channel. So check it out. That's Arena of History. And we got a call coming in, too. By the way, our listener line number is 360-533-5259. Hi, you're on the air.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
I'd like to say thank you to your guest to explain to people that Russians are just the people, They just want to live their lives. They want to see the happy kids going to school. They want to go fishing, hunting, and then just enjoy the life. They don't care about Assad. They don't care about America. They just want to be left alone. So stop making that Russians is a boogeyman.
I don't think the Russian people are the boogeyman at all. I do think that Putin is a problem because of what he wants to do.
Well, yeah, I told the dog last time. It's just in Russia the way. If he gets outsourced of power, the next person will find something about him, and they will probably try to put him in jail for the rest of his life, or who knows. So it's almost like a struggle for life with him. Plus, the last election, he has the communists running against him, and the Zhirinovsky, who is like Donald Trump, the crazy one. So people vote for Putin because Russians always like a strong man. They're used to it.
So what's your take on Trump then?
Well, on Trump, I was supporting him until now a couple days. Now I think he's a moron, like everybody's saying he is.
So what made you come to that conclusion? Because he wants to.
Well, maybe not moron, but I think now he's a puppet of somebody. Somebody stronger than him, holding him up and telling him what to do. It's just absolutely clear that Bashar Assad would never attack the civilians after one day after Trump said he's gonna pull out the troops from the Syria, and very next day, and plus the Putin was warning 2 weeks ago, then 2 days ago before attack, he was saying that we have a credible intelligence that they're gonna stage another attack because first one was stage 2, and it's happened, and nobody listens. Everybody always Assad. Why would Assad do it? Because what, he wants the Americans to stay in Syria? Of course not. Plus, why would he attack the civilians too, not even rebels? Speaking of rebels, they call the Al-Nusra, who is the Al-Qaeda in Syria. And that's who Americans are supporting. So people just absolutely not involved, living their lives, and I don't understand that we're supporting terrorists now, and the Assad and Russian fighting terrorists in there.
Okay.
About 2 years ago, they showed that al-Nusra, that terrorist group in Syria, they beheaded, I believe, 12 or 14-year-old boy, the Palestinian boy. They accused him being a spy. They released a video beheading the little kid, for God's sake, and that's who we support up there. So I know it's just hard to believe
it is.
How people.
It's your point is kind of interesting, and it's one actually that in the past Trump actually made, and I agree that I think we need to be careful about this. Is that it's hard to tell who's the good guys and who the bad guys, quote unquote, in this are. You know, if you're
because you guys give example, who's going to replace him? It's already been done before with Iraq, and because if they outsource that Bashar Assad, then that al-Nusra will take over, and it's going to be a terrorist country. So.
Well, then again, it's hard to how do you determine what is a terrorist and what's one? Well, of course, the problem with terrorists and freedom fighters is a point of view.
I consider people who's beheading the little kid, I consider them as a terrorist. And also, never mind. Why Putin put everything online, war with America, over the guy who uses chemical weapons?
And that is a good question. I agree with you. That is a good question which is why I think that we haven't actually done anything yet. And I would give the president credit on that they're looking it over to make sure. And with John Bolton as his now as his Secretary of State, Bolton is a little bit of a hawk, but he's also a cautious man, and he's very intelligent. So we'll have to see what happens in the long run, because I do think we have to be careful not having getting ourselves in a war with Russia over what could be a misunderstanding.
It doesn't make sense, especially over the Syria. Who cares about them? It's just because they didn't do it. It's not fair to just.
I'm going to have to let you go because we're down to 1 minute left. But I really appreciate your calls and so yeah, call in anytime and let us know what your opinion is.
Okay, thank you very much.
You betcha. Bye bye. That's interesting. Having
having a Russian perspective on it.
You bet.
And I go, obviously, who cares about Syria? Well, Vladimir Putin, or he wouldn't have Russian forces there and ships there. I mean, again, it has strategic value to him having it. But again, it is difficult when you start looking at the faction than that, because the level of hatred and the cultural differences are so great sometimes. The idea he mentioned about beheading, but beheadings happen a lot on both sides of that issue, because it's.
If you wish to join the quest for knowledge, the battle for truth, please hit the like button, recommend my channel to others, and of course, subscribe. Thank you kindly.